Okay, so welcome to the second part of the Madalynne S9478 sew along. Before we get started, one thing that I forgot to mention in the last video was the center front frame. So you want to make sure that you have your main fabric and that is block fused to or pinned to your lining fabric, which could either be stretch mesh, power knit, or sheer cup lining. I'm using sheer cup lining, so that's why it looks a little bit lighter in color. Power knit is usually a little bit darker. So those two, so it's actually two layers right here. And then you also have another layer of your lining fabric. So you have 3 layers total, the main fabric and the lining fabric fused together, and then another one of your lining fabric. The reason being is that we are going to eventually sew the lace applique onto this piece. And it's better if you have it backed with something. It makes it a little bit sturdier, so that it's sometimes when you're top applying the lace to just one layer of fabric, it just gets sucked into your feed dogs. It just makes it a lot easier. So I want to mention that before we even get started. So the first step, and I am not going along with the simplicity directions. I feel like this way is a little bit easier as we've sewn it. We've just found like little tricks here and there. So they might deviate a little bit from the instructions, and that's because I just think it's a little bit easier to do it how it's in the sew along. So first things first, and this is going to be really tedious, but let's just knock it out on the first go around, is we are gonna sew down all the laces on all the pieces. Yeah, this is not the most fun part, but I just like to knock it out in the beginning. So we have the side cup, the center front cup. We are going to sew them on, and then the side frame pieces. This one, and then we will sew the center front lace pieces together. Where did my other one go? Here it is. Yeah. And I'm going to show you a little trick for this because this is not the easiest thing to sew through one layer of lace. So if you are not using a lace overlay, I'm kind of jealous of you right now because it is not the most fun part of this sew on. So in order to sew down the lace appliques, we are going to use a small zigzag. And I know all you new time bra makers are going to be asking, what is your zigzag stitch setting? So it varies from machine to machine. I wish there was like a universal zigzag stitch setting, but unfortunately there isn't. So just get out some test fabric and test it. So, but you want it to be a really small, and you really just want the width to just go across the width of this little like lace piece right here. And you're going to go, as you sew, you're going to go down, put your needle down, lift your presser foot up, pivot, put it back down, and then go all the way around again. Put your needle down, raise your presser foot, pivot, put your presser foot down, and then sew all the way along. So again, it's really tedious, but it really is necessary. So yeah. Let's take a look at what I just sewed. Now, if you saw me, well, of course you did see me sewing, but I actually pivoted at the low point of the scallop. And then as I went to the top, I had to pivot my needle again to go back down. So you pivot at the bottom point of the lace, of the scallop lace, as well as the top point. If you're using one of these kits with the lace overlay, so not only is it's a gorgeous kit, but there's going to be a lot of thread changes in order to have it look really nice and clean. So if you see here, I actually used light blue thread for the top thread and then beige thread for the bottom so that it would look really nice and clean on the inside. But let me see if I can get really close and you can see how. So you can see that my zigzag stitches only really went across that little border that's along the scallop edge. Also, I did not backstitch at the beginning or the end. Both of these will be sewn into a seam, so you don't really have to worry about it. All right, now I did this one. Let's do all the other ones. Okay, so now it's time to sew these two pieces together along this seam. To make it easy, here is my trick, is that I am going to sew over, I'm going to use this sheer cup lining to sew the seam. It adds stability and makes it a lot easier so that the lace doesn't get sucked into your feed dogs. If you don't have sheer cup lining, you can use tulle. You actually can use some tissue paper. So if you have extra tissue paper from your pattern, you can use this as well, and then you tear it away after you sew the seam. It makes it so much easier. So I'm going to lay this over, and you're just going to be sewing that seam from that little L shape, that little corner, all the way down. So now once I've sewn it, I'm going to take my duck-billed scissors, which are applique scissors, but they allow me to get really close to the seam allowance. And I'm just going to trim it super close to the stitch line. See how it's just a little bit is there? So pretty much you won't even see it. Then I am going to, then I'm going to use my Otis 505 spray adhesive, and I'm going to spray this off camera. I'm going to spray the wrong side of this, and then I'm going to put it on my center front piece, the one that has 2 layers. I'm going to lay it on top. I'm going to pin it, and then I'm going to zigzag the edges down just like I did with all the other pieces. Okay, so let's start sewing the V opening. So you are going to place the right side of your main fabric and your lining fabric against the right side of your other lining fabric. And you are going to sew these together in the V shape using a straight stitch. And I find it very helpful if I put a pin about 1/4 of an inch below the V opening. This is where I want my stitching to stop. Then I'm going to pivot and then start again. I'm also going to back stitch when I get down to the V, I'm going to back stitch, then go forward back to the V point, and then go forwards again, and then back stitch again. So you want to reinforce this V. So I'm going to back stitch on either side of the V for about 1/2 of an inch. See my V point there? See the extra stitching on either side? Then I'm going to clip to, but not through that stitching. Then I'm going to understitch. And this helps, understitching helps from the lining from rolling to the right side. So if you see here, I just folded the lining back and I'm going to be stitching through the lining as well as the seam allowances only. I'm going to start at the top, but I'm going to end about, let's say, 1/2 of an inch from the V opening. Okay, so after I sew the understitching, this is what it's going to look like. You are going to fold the lining to the inside, and I like to pin it. And it's not going to want to lay flat. It's going to look wonky, and you're going to think like, what, did I do something wrong? The key here is you're going to use your iron and your steam. Make sure that your iron is on a synthetic setting. And you are going to bring it back into shape using the steam. It doesn't want to lay flat. Okay, I'm going to go over to my iron. It's especially bunching up right here. Once I put a little bit of steam on it and then bring it into shape, you're going to put a little steam here, press your iron down, hold it there because it's the active cooling that actually sets your fabric, and then keep doing that until it's in shape. I'm going to come back and show you what mine looks like. Okay, so I steamed it. And look how much better it looks 1,000 times. There's only like a slight bump right there and it's like puckering just a tiny bit. But from the outside, it looks beautiful. Yeah, nobody's gonna see that little bit. So also I wanna note that once we turn everything inside out, you see that like my lining is not lining up. It's a little bit like off. Up here is a little bit off as well. That's okay. I want my fabric to lay nice and flat, nice and smooth, and then I'm going to clean this up after we insert the V wire. So if yours is a lot of times what we have been seeing is that this is slanted out a little bit. This is off on one side. Don't worry about that. We're gonna clean it up so it's a really nice, sharp, what is this? Sharp edges, that's the word I'm looking for. Okay, so the next step is you're gonna take your channeling. Now your kit could have come with curved channeling or straight channeling or one or the other. So it could have curved channeling and straight channeling, or it could have had one or the other. That's okay. Here's an example of the straight plus channeling. Here's an example of the curved. You can use either or for this step. I prefer the curved. So what you're going to do is you're going to put your V wire inside your channeling. And if it's a little bulky towards the bottom, that's okay, because once you give it a little bit of steam, you can flatten it out and you won't even notice it on the finished garment. So you want to have a little bit of a tail at either end. About 1/2 of an inch to an inch. Then I am going to place it in between the two layers. V should sit about an inch down, so it shouldn't be right up against the V opening. It should sit a little bit down. And then you want to make sure that the wire starts about 5/8 of an inch down from the top, because that is your wire seam line. So you're going to have to sew 1/4 of an inch here, and then you're going to turn that back and you have to sew another 1/4 down there. So you don't want to hit your wire. So you want to make sure that your wire is about 5/8 of an inch down from the top edge, but you want to be catching your channeling at the top. Okay. So once I have it pinned in place, I'm going to sew a straight stitch, tack it. I'm going to be sewing through both layers of fabric as well as the channeling that is in between, about 1/4 inch down from the top. That's going to hold it in place. Okay, now everything is in place. All we have to do is clean it up. Okay, so let's clean this up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my Otis 505 spray adhesive. And I'm going to spray in between the two layers. And then I'm going to press them together. All right, so now it's laying all flat, but as you can tell, it is not laying in the original shape. You can see it's kind of curved down here. It's skewed out on that edge. So that's where you're going to clean it up. So I'm going to make these two edges straight. And I'm also going to clean up the bottom edge. It's going to dip down a little bit, and that's okay, but I don't want this big dip down here, right at the center front. Okay, so that looks a lot better, doesn't it? Okay, so that is the end of the first part. I'm gonna go ahead and at the next video, I am going to sew the center front frame to the side frame at the vertical seam. Super easy. I don't need to show it on camera. Using a straight stitch 1/4 inch seam allowance here. And that's it. So I will see you in the next video.